The sound of designer heels clicking against marble floors still haunts me, not the gentle tap of bridesmaids rushing to help with last-minute touches, but the deliberate, calculated stride of someone who came to destroy everything I'd spent 2 years planning. When my sister Victoria walked into the bridal suite at Riverside Gardens Estate, wearing a floor-length ivory gown with a cathedral train longer than mine, the room fell silent except for the sharp intake of breath from my maid of honor. "Natalie, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." "Surprise," Victoria announced, spinning in her white dress like she was the bride herself. I decided to upgrade my outfit. "Don't I look stunning?" The three bridesmaids froze, holding bouquets of blush pink peonies that suddenly seemed insignificant next to the spectacle before us. My mother Helen stood in the corner, her face a mask I couldn't read, but it was Natalie's expression that told me everything. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or wedding day nerves. This was war. What I didn't know then, as I stood there in my grandmother's silk gown feeling like an extra at my own wedding, was that Victoria's white dress was just the opening move in a game she'd been playing for months. The real devastation would come later, when Natalie would orchestrate a revelation so precise, so perfectly timed, that my sister would flee the reception in tears before the cake was even cut. 3 months before my wedding day, everything seemed to be falling into place with the kind of effortless grace that only comes from meticulous planning and genuine love. Ryan Caldwell and I had been together for 4 years. Ever since we'd literally collided in the Westfield University library during finals week. He was cramming for his engineering exam, I was researching tort law for my pre-law thesis, and somehow our scattered papers created the foundation for a love story I thought was unshakable. The engagement had been a fairy tale moment at Grandview Country Club during my family's annual charity gala. Ryan had worked with the event planner to have a spotlight trained on our table during the silent auction, and when the auctioneer announced a special item not in the catalog, Ryan dropped to one knee with my great-grandmother's Art Deco ring. The entire ballroom of Millbrook Valley's social elite had erupted in applause, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Victoria had been among the first to congratulate us that night, wrapping me in what seemed like a genuinely emotional hug. "I'm so happy for you, Claire," she'd whispered in my ear. "You deserve this more than anyone." Her smile was radiant, her enthusiasm infectious, and when I asked her to be my maid of honor 2 weeks later, she accepted with tears in her eyes. "I can't think of anyone I'd rather have by my side," I told her over lunch at Blue Harbor Cafe, sliding a small gift box across the table. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet engraved with Sisters Forever that I'd had custom made. Victoria fastened it around her wrist immediately, declaring she'd wear it on the wedding day. The months that followed were a whirlwind of venue visits, dress fittings, and endless Pinterest boards. Victoria threw herself into maid of honor duties with an enthusiasm that impressed even our detail-oriented mother. She organized my bachelorette party at a luxury spa in the Berkshires, coordinated with the other bridesmaids on their dresses, and even helped Ryan plan elements of his bachelor party. She suggested vendors, attended cake tastings, and spent hours with me at the Ivory Room, helping select my dress. "This one," she'd said definitively when I emerged from the fitting room in the silk creation that would become my wedding gown. "This is the one that makes you look like the queen you are." The salesperson had agreed, and even I had to admit the dress was perfection. Elegant without being ostentatious, classic without being boring, with delicate beadwork that caught the light beautifully. Victoria had insisted on seeing every detail of the wedding preparation. She'd asked for copies of the floor plans, vendor contracts, and even the timeline Diane Martinez, our wedding planner, had created for the day. "I want to make sure everything goes perfectly," she explained. "This is your big day and I won't let anything go wrong." Her attention to detail had been touching rather than overwhelming. When she suggested we hire Marcus Reed, a photographer she'd found, I trusted her judgment completely. When she recommended specific flowers for the centerpieces that would photograph better, I appreciated her thoughtfulness. When she offered to handle communications with some of the vendors to lighten my load during bar exam prep, I was grateful for her support. The night before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner at Grandview Country Club, Victoria had given a speech that left everyone in tears. She spoke about our childhood, about how proud she was of the woman I'd become, about how Ryan was gaining not just a wife but a sister who would love him fiercely. She raised her champagne flute and declared, "To Claire and Ryan, may your love story be even more beautiful than your wedding day." I hugged her tightly afterward, overwhelmed with gratitude for having such a supportive sister. "Thank you for everything," I whispered. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "That's what sisters are for," she replied, but something in her tone made me pull back to look at her face. Her smile seemed different somehow, though I couldn't pinpoint why. The champagne and emotion of the evening made everything feel slightly surreal anyway. That night I'd fallen asleep in my childhood bedroom for the last time, as Claire Thompson, excited about becoming Claire Caldwell in less than 24 hours. Victoria had insisted we stick to tradition and not see each other until the ceremony, so she was staying at our cousin's house nearby. "I want your first look at me tomorrow to be when I'm walking down the aisle as your maid of honor," she'd said. "It'll be more special that way." The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden October light that photographers dream about. I woke up naturally at 6:30, feeling surprisingly calm and refreshed. The bridal suite at Riverside Gardens Estate was everything I'd envisioned. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a marble bathroom with perfect lighting for getting ready, and enough space for my mother, 3 bridesmaids, and Victoria to prepare without feeling cramped. Natalie arrived first, carrying coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery. We'd been best friends since freshman year of college, and she knew exactly how to keep me calm and happy. The other bridesmaids, my college roommate Kelly, Ryan's sister Megan, and my cousin Sarah arrived soon after, all bubbly excitement and perfectly coordinated in their blush pink dresses. "Where's Victoria?" Kelly asked as we started the hair and makeup process. "Shouldn't the maid of honor be here by now?" I checked my phone. It was already 9:30. And Victoria was supposed to have arrived at 9. "She's probably just running a little late," I said, though a small knot of worry began forming in my stomach. Victoria was never late for important events. By 10:15 I was genuinely concerned. The photographer Sam Williams had arrived and was capturing candid moments of the preparation process, but the shots felt incomplete without my maid of honor. I tried calling Victoria's phone but it went straight to voicemail. "Maybe she went to get breakfast and lost track of time," my mother suggested, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me. At 10:45, just as I was about to send someone to look for her, we heard those distinctive heels on the marble hallway outside the bridal suite. The door opened, and Victoria appeared in the doorway like an apparition from a nightmare. The dress was undeniably beautiful, ivory silk with intricate beadwork and a sweetheart neckline that flattered her figure perfectly. The cathedral train pulled behind her in elegant folds, and she wore a delicate tiara that caught the morning light streaming through the window. She looked absolutely stunning, and absolutely like a bride. "I know what you're all thinking," Victoria said, gliding into the room as if she were making a grand entrance at a ball, but I couldn't resist. "When I saw this dress at the boutique last week, it just spoke to me. I thought, why should Claire be the only one who gets to feel like a princess today?" The silence in the room was deafening. Even Sam, who was presumably accustomed to family drama at weddings, had stopped taking photos and stood frozen with his camera low. "Victoria," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, "you can't wear white to my wedding. You know that." She laughed, a sound that seemed almost musical but carried an undertone I'd never heard before. "Oh, come on, Claire. Don't be so traditional. It's 2024. These old rules are so antiquated. Besides, it's ivory, not white, completely different." Natalie stepped forward, her usually warm demeanor replaced by something much colder. "Victoria, this is completely inappropriate. You need to change." "Into what?" Victoria spread her arms wide, the movement making her train fan out dramatically. "I didn't bring anything else. I guess I'll just have to make do." She examined her reflection in the full-length mirror, adjusting her tiara with obvious satisfaction. "Don't I look gorgeous? I bet the photographer will get some amazing shots of both of us." My mother finally found her voice. "Victoria Elizabeth Thompson, what on earth are you thinking? This is your sister's wedding day, and I'm here to celebrate it. Victoria replied. I just wanted to look my best for such a special occasion. Isn't that what families do? Support each other? The manipulation in her words was so blatant, so perfectly calculated, that I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about a dress or tradition or even sisterly competition. This was something else entirely, something deliberate and cruel that I was only beginning to understand. Natalie moved closer to me, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently. When I looked at her, I saw something in her expression that surprised me, not just anger at Victoria's behavior, but a kind of grim determination, as if she'd been expecting this moment. Claire, Natalie said quietly, why don't you let me handle this? You focus on getting ready, and I'll take care of your sister. There was something in her tone that made Victoria's confident smile falter slightly. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face before she regained her composure. There's nothing to handle, Victoria said, though her voice had lost some of its musical quality. I'm ready to be the best maid of honor Claire could ask for. As the morning continued, Victoria maintained her position with stubborn determination. She posed for photos with the bridal party, participated in the champagne toast, and even helped with last-minute dress adjustments, all while wearing her ivory gown with that infuriating tiara. The other bridesmaids shot disapproving glances her way, but Victoria seemed to thrive on the attention, both positive and negative. What struck me most was how prepared she seemed for every objection. When my mother suggested she could borrow a dress from one of the bridesmaids, Victoria pointed out that she was 2 sizes smaller than everyone else. When I mentioned that photos would look strange with 2 women in white, she suggested we could edit the color in post-production. When the wedding planner Diane Martinez diplomatically approached about the dress code, Victoria produced a printed copy of the invitation that made no specific mention of guest attire restriction. I've been planning this look for weeks, Victoria confided to Sam during a brief moment when she thought I wasn't listening. I wanted to make sure I looked perfect for my sister's big day. The phrase sent chills down my spine. Not I wanted to look nice or I wanted to dress up for the occasion, but I've been planning this look for weeks. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, or a moment of poor judgment. This was premeditated. As we prepared to leave for the ceremony at Michael's Cathedral, Natalie appeared at my side with my bouquet, and a reassuring smile. You look absolutely radiant, she said, and I could hear the truth in her voice. Despite everything Victoria had thrown at the morning, I did feel beautiful in my grandmother's dress, confident in my love for Ryan, and excited about the ceremony ahead. What are you going to do about Victoria? I asked quietly, as we waited for the transportation to arrive. Natalie's smile took on a quality I'd never seen before, still warm but with an edge that was almost predatory. Don't worry about Victoria, she said, adjusting a strand of my hair with gentle fingers. I have a feeling she's going to have a very memorable day. As we walked toward the limousines that would take us to the cathedral, Victoria fell into step beside me, her train rustling against the gravel. Are you ready for this, sister? She asked, linking her arm through mine with false intimacy. More ready than I've ever been for anything, I replied, and I meant it. Despite her best efforts to sabotage the morning, despite the white dress and the calculated cruelty, I was still going to marry the man I loved in front of everyone who mattered to us. What I didn't know was that Victoria's white dress was just the beginning, and that Natalie had been quietly preparing for this moment far longer than I could have imagined. The ceremony would be beautiful, the photos would be stunning, and the reception would begin with all the joy and celebration I dreamed of. But before the evening was over, my sister would learn that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who sees you most clearly. And Natalie Brooks had been seeing Victoria very clearly indeed. The ceremony at St. Michael's Cathedral proceeded with breathtaking beauty, despite the underlying tension that Victoria's white dress had created. The Gothic arches soared above us as sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the stone floors. Ryan stood at the altar in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his face lighting up the moment he saw me walking down the aisle on my father's arm. For those precious 30 minutes, Victoria's calculated disruption faded into background noise. Father Mackenzie's voice echoed through the cathedral as he spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond we were entering. When Ryan and I exchanged vows, his hands steady and warm in mine, I felt the profound rightness of this moment, Nothing Victoria could do would diminish the truth of what Ryan and I shared, the foundation we'd built together, or the future we were promising each other. Victoria played her role perfectly during the ceremony, standing at the altar in her ivory gown with that practiced smile never wavering. She held my bouquet during the ring exchange, adjusted my train when we knelt for the blessing, and even managed to look appropriately emotional during the kiss. To the congregation of 200 guests, she appeared to be the devoted sister, slightly overdressed perhaps, but clearly supportive of my happiness. But I caught the moments when her mask slipped. During Father Mackenzie's homily about the importance of honesty in marriage, Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When Ryan's grandmother read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind, Victoria's fingers drummed silently against her leg. And when we lit the unity candle together, symbolizing the joining of our two lives into one, Victoria's gaze wasn't on the flame but on the photographer, making sure Sam captured her prominent position in every shot. The receiving line after the ceremony gave me my first real glimpse into how the extended family and friends were processing Victoria's fashion choice. Most guests were too polite to comment directly, but the carefully controlled expressions spoke volumes. Ryan's mother Patricia kissed my cheek and whispered, "You look absolutely stunning, dear. That dress suits you perfectly," with an emphasis that suggested she was pointedly not commenting on anyone else's attire. My college friend Maria, never one to mince words, approached Victoria directly during the photo session outside the cathedral. "Interesting dress choice," she said with the kind of smile that could cut glass. "Very bold." Victoria's response was pitch perfect in its false innocence. "Thank you. I wanted to look special for Claire's big day. Sisters should coordinate, don't you think?" The way she said it made it sound like wearing white to someone else's wedding was a thoughtful gesture rather than a calculated insult. During the formal photos, Sam worked with professional efficiency, but I noticed him subtly positioning Victoria in ways that minimized the visual impact of her white dress. When she tried to move into more prominent positions, he would gently redirect with comments about lighting or composition. It was clear that despite being Victoria's recommendation, Sam understood exactly what was happening and whose side he was on. Natalie watched everything with the focused attention of someone conducting surveillance. She stayed close during the photo session, offering to hold bouquets or adjust trains, but I could see her cataloging every interaction, every comment, every moment when Victoria revealed her true intention. When Victoria made a seemingly innocent comment about how she hoped the photos would show both Thompson sisters looking their absolute best, Natalie's smile was sharp enough to etch glass. The transportation to Riverside Gardens estate for the reception gave us our first private moment as a married couple. Ryan took my hand in the back of the vintage Rolls-Royce we'd rented, his thumb stroking across my new wedding ring. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked, and the sound of my new name sent a thrill through me, despite everything else. "I'm perfect," I said, and realized I meant it. "Victoria can wear whatever she wants. Nothing she does can touch the—" I gestured between us, encompassing the love and commitment we'd just publicly declared. Ryan's expression grew more serious. "Claire, I need you to know that what Victoria did today wasn't just inappropriate, it was cruel, and if you want to address it, I'll support whatever you decide to do." The fact that Ryan, who generally preferred to avoid family drama, was ready to take a stand, told me everything about how egregious Victoria's behavior had been. But before I could respond, we were pulling up to Riverside Gardens estate, where the reception was about to begin. The venue looked like something from a fairy tale. Diane Martinez had transformed the ballroom with cascading floral arrangements in blush and ivory, crystal chandeliers reflecting soft candlelight, and table settings that belonged in a magazine. The cocktail hour was already in full swing on the terrace, with guests mingling over signature drinks and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played classical arrangements of modern songs. Victoria was holding court near the bar when we arrived, her white dress practically glowing in the golden hour light. She'd positioned herself strategically where arriving guests would see her first, and she was clearly enjoying the attention. Some family members looked uncomfortable, others seemed fascinated by the drama, but Victoria basked in all of it with equal enthusiasm. "She's really something," Natalie murmured, appearing at my elbow with a glass of champagne. "I have to admire her commitment to the performance." There was something different about Natalie's tone, a quality I'd never heard before that made me study her face more carefully. Her usual warmth was still there, but underneath it was something cooler, more calculating. "Natalie, is there something you're not telling me?" She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made me think of chess masters planning moves several turns ahead. "Let's just say that Victoria isn't the only one who's been planning for today. Enjoy your cocktail hour, Claire. The real celebration is about to begin." Before I could ask what she meant, Ryan's college friends surrounded us with congratulations and toasts, and the moment was lost in the swirl of reception festivity. But Natalie's words echoed in my mind as we made our rounds, greeting guests, posing for photos, and trying to be present for every moment of our celebration. Dinner was served in the main ballroom, with Victoria seated at the head table in her position as maid of honor. The seating arrangement placed her directly in the photographer's line of sight for most shots, and she made sure to be animated and engaging throughout the meal. She laughed at every joke, participated enthusiastically in conversations, and generally played the role of the perfect sister to anyone who might be watching. But I was watching too, and I began to notice things that hadn't registered before. The way Victoria's eyes would dart to the photographer whenever she thought no one was looking, making sure she was being captured from her best angle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. How she positioned herself during conversations to ensure she was included in candid shots, the subtle way she would touch her tiara or adjust her dress to draw attention to her appearance. During the salad course, Victoria leaned over to me with what appeared to be sisterly affection. "I hope you're not upset about the dress," she said quietly enough that only I could hear. "I just wanted to feel special too. You understand, don't you?" The manipulation in her tone was so blatant that I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't about feeling special or wanting to look nice. This was about stealing attention, about making herself the center of focus on someone else's most important day. And the way she phrased it as a question made it impossible for me to respond without seeming petty or unreasonable. "Of course I understand," I replied evenly, because what else could I say with 200 people watching our every interaction? But inside, something hardened. This wasn't sisterly rivalry or poor judgment. This was deliberate sabotage disguised as innocent enthusiasm. The speeches began after the main course, and Ryan's best man delivered a heartfelt tribute to our relationship that had half the room in tears. My father spoke about watching me grow up and his joy at gaining Ryan as a son. Ryan's father welcomed me into their family with warmth that made my chest tight with emotion. Then it was Victoria's turn. She stood gracefully, her white dress catching the light as she moved to the microphone. The room fell silent in anticipation, and I held my breath, wondering what she would say after everything that had happened. "Good evening, everyone," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "For those who don't know me, I'm Victoria Thompson, Claire's sister and maid of honor. And I have to say, this has been the most magical day." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room before landing on me with what looked like genuine affection. "Claire, we've been through everything together. Childhood adventures, teenage drama, college stress, career challenges. You've always been there for me, supporting my dreams and believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself." The words were beautiful, perfectly crafted to sound heartfelt and sisterly, but something in her delivery felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced this speech in front of a mirror to get the emotional inflections just right. "When you told me about Ryan, I knew immediately that he was special, not just because of how your whole face lit up when you said his name, but because of how he looked at you, like you were the most precious thing in the world. And you are, Claire. You're precious to all of us." More perfect words that would sound wonderful to anyone who didn't know about the white dress, the calculated positioning, the months of what I was beginning to realize had been systematic undermining, disguised as support. "Marriage is about partnership," Victoria continued, warming to her theme. "It's about finding someone who sees you for who you really are, and loves you anyway. Someone who will stand by you through everything life throws at you. someone who will never let you down. The irony of Victoria speaking about loyalty and never letting someone down while wearing white to my wedding wasn't lost on me, but the guests were nodding along, clearly moved by her words. Ryan, you're not just gaining a wife today, you're gaining a sister who will love you and protect this marriage with everything she has, because that's what family does. We show up for each other, we put each other first, and we never, ever let anything come between us. She raised her champagne glass, and the entire room followed. To Claire and Ryan, may your love story be everything you've ever dreamed of, and may your family always be there to celebrate every beautiful moment. The applause was thunderous, and several people were wiping away tears. Victoria had delivered a masterpiece of manipulation, wrapping her selfish behavior in the language of love and family loyalty. Anyone who criticized her now would seem churlish, particularly since her speech had been so moving and appropriate. As she sat down, Victoria caught my eye and smiled with what looked like genuine warmth. But there was something else there too. Something that made my skin crawl. It was the smile of someone who had just executed a perfect move in a game I was only beginning to understand I was playing. Natalie stood up next, having volunteered to speak as my closest friend and college roommate. She moved to the microphone with the same grace she'd shown throughout the day, but I noticed her posture was different somehow, more purposeful, more predatory. Thank you, Victoria, for those beautiful words, Natalie began, her voice carrying a warmth that somehow managed to sound sincere and dangerous at the same time. It's wonderful to hear about sisterly love and family loyalty. Those are such important values, aren't they? Something in her tone made Victoria's confident smile falter slightly. I watched my sister's face as she tried to read Natalie's expression, clearly sensing that something was off, but unable to pinpoint exactly what. I've known Claire for almost a decade, Natalie continued, and I've had the privilege of watching her grow into the incredible woman she is today. She's loyal, generous, trusting, and kind to a fault. Sometimes too kind, if I'm being honest. The type of person who always sees the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. The words seemed innocent enough, but there was an undercurrent that made several people shift uncomfortably in their seat. Victoria's hand moved to her champagne glass, her knuckles white against the crystal stem. Claire has this amazing ability to forgive people who hurt her, Natalie said, her gaze finding mine across the room. She always assumes the best intentions, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. It's one of her most beautiful qualities, but it also means that sometimes people take advantage of her generosity. Now the tension in the room was palpable. Guests were beginning to sense that this wasn't a typical maid of honor speech, though most couldn't identify exactly what was different about it. But here's what I love most about Claire, Natalie said, her voice growing stronger. She may be trusting and forgiving, but she's not naive. She sees everything, remembers everything, and when the time is right she acts with precision and grace. She doesn't get mad, she gets even. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. She was staring at Natalie with the expression of someone who had just realized they'd walked into a trap. So tonight, as we celebrate Claire and Ryan's beautiful beginning, Natalie said, raising her champagne glass, I want to toast to honesty, to authenticity, to showing up as your true self, not as some carefully constructed version designed to deceive or manipulate others. The pause that followed was heavy with implication. Several guests looked confused, others seemed to be putting pieces together, and Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. And most importantly, Natalie continued, her smile sharp enough to cut diamonds, I want to toast to consequence, because in my experience, they always find their way to the people who deserve them most. She lifted her glass higher, and the room followed suit out of habit, though many people looked uncertain about what exactly they were toasting. To Claire and Ryan, and to everyone getting exactly what they deserve. The applause was confused and scattered, and as Natalie sat down, the energy in the room had shifted completely. Victoria was staring at her with undisguised panic, and I realized that whatever Natalie had planned, it was about to begin. Ryan squeezed my hand under the table. Do you know what that was about? He whispered. I shook my head, but my heart was racing with anticipation and something that might have been fear. Natalie had essentially declared war in front of 200 people, and Victoria looked like someone who had just realized she'd brought a knife to a gunfight. The evening was far from over, and I had a feeling that the real drama was just beginning. The tension following Natalie's speech lingered in the air like smoke as the reception moved into the dancing portion of the evening. The string quartet had been replaced by the DJ, and couples began making their way to the dance floor as the lights dimmed and candles flickered across the table. Ryan and I shared our first dance to At Last by Etta James, his arms strong and steady around me as we swayed in the center of the room surrounded by our loved ones. But even in that perfect moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was building beneath the surface of our celebration. Victoria had regained some of her composure after Natalie's pointed toast, but she kept glancing around the room with the alertness of someone expecting an attack from an unknown direction. Natalie, meanwhile, had excused herself from the head table shortly after her speech, claiming she needed to check on something with the wedding planner. As Ryan spun me gently under the soft glow of the chandeliers, I caught sight of Victoria dancing with our cousin Mike. She was performing again, laughing brightly at something he said, her white dress flowing around her like liquid starlight. But her eyes weren't focused on her dance partner. Instead, they kept darting toward the exit where Natalie had disappeared 20 minutes earlier. "You're thinking too hard," Ryan murmured against my ear as the song drew to a close. "This is supposed to be the part where you're lost in wedded bliss." I smiled up at him, allowing myself to be pulled back into the moment. "You're right, I'm being ridiculous. It's our wedding day, and I'm married to the most wonderful man in the world. Nothing else matters." He kissed me softly as the song ended, and the other couples joined us on the dance floor. My father cut in for the father-daughter dance, and Ryan was swept away by his mother for their traditional mother-son moment. For the next hour, I tried to focus entirely on the celebration, dancing with college friends, chatting with relatives I hadn't seen in years, and accepting congratulations from guests who kept commenting on how radiant I looked. But part of my attention remained fixed on Victoria, who seemed to be working the room with unusual intensity. She danced with every groomsman, charmed the older relatives with animated conversations, and posed for countless photos with various family members. To anyone watching casually, she was simply being a good hostess and enjoying the party, but I knew my sister well enough to recognize the forced quality of her enthusiasm, the way her laughter seemed a half-second too loud, the manner in which her gaze kept returning to the ballroom entrance. It was during the cake-cutting ceremony that I finally understood what had her so unsettled. As Ryan and I approached the elaborate three-tiered confection decorated with sugar flowers that matched my bouquet, I noticed Victoria positioning herself prominently in the photographer's line of sight. She had managed to work her way into almost every important shot of the evening, her ivory dress ensuring she would be prominently featured in our wedding album for decades to come. But as Sam raised his camera to capture the moment when Ryan and I would cut the first slice together, Victoria's confident smile suddenly froze. Her gaze had locked onto something behind the photographer, and the color drained from her face so rapidly that for a moment I thought she might faint. Following her line of sight, I saw Natalie approaching with a small group of people I didn't immediately recognize. There was an older woman with silver hair wearing an elegant navy dress, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a slight limp, and most surprisingly, Jordan Hayes, Victoria's ex-boyfriend from college whom I hadn't seen in over 3 years. The group moved through the crowd with purposeful direction, and I noticed that other guests were beginning to take notice as well. Conversations gradually quieted as people sensed something significant was about to happen. Even the DJ seemed to pick up on the shift in energy, lowering the music volume as Natalie's group reached the edge of the crowd gathered around the cake table. "Claire, Ryan," Natalie said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but there are some people here who have been very eager to meet Victoria. They've traveled quite a distance to be here tonight." Victoria's hand moved to grip the edge of the nearest table, her knuckles white against the ivory tablecloth. "Natalie, what are you doing?" she asked, and for the first time all day, her voice lacked its usual musical confidence. "I'm making sure everyone gets properly introduced," Natalie replied with a smile that could have powered the chandelier above us. Victoria, I'd like you to meet Margaret Sinclair. The older woman stepped forward, her intelligent eyes studying Victoria with the intensity of someone examining a particularly interesting specimen. Miss Thompson, she said, her voice carrying a slight British accent. It's so nice to finally meet you in person. We've heard so much about you. I'm sorry, Victoria said, her practiced charm noticeably strained, but I don't believe we've met. Are you a friend of Claire's? Margaret's smile was perfectly polite and absolutely arctic. Not exactly, dear. I'm the director of the Whitmore Foundation. You submitted several grant applications to us over the past 2 years for your nonprofit organization, Heaven Hearts, applications that included some rather interesting financial documentation. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her careful composure cracked completely, and she took an involuntary step backward. Around us, the wedding guests had gone completely silent, sensing drama but not yet understanding its nature. I think there's been some misunderstanding, Victoria said, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Oh, I don't think so, Margaret continued conversationally. You see, we have a very thorough verification process for our grants, especially when the amounts requested are as substantial as yours were. We always investigate the organizations we're considering funding, their leadership, their financial practices, their actual charitable work. The man with the limp stepped forward, his expression gentle but implacable. I'm David Chen, from the Connecticut Attorney General's Office, Charitable Organizations Division. Ms. Thompson, we've been trying to reach you for several weeks regarding some irregularities in Haven Heart's registration and financial reporting. Victoria's breathing had become visibly shallow, and small beads of perspiration appeared along her hairline despite the cool evening air. This is hardly the appropriate time or place for business discussions, she managed to say. You're absolutely right, Natalie agreed, her tone warm with false sympathy. A wedding reception is such a joyous occasion, isn't it? A time for families to come together and celebrate love and commitment, and honesty. Which brings us to Jordan. Jordan Hayes stepped forward, and I could see the nervous energy radiating from him. He'd always been a gentle soul, the kind of person who avoided confrontation, which made his presence here all the more significant. Hi, Victoria, he said quietly. You look surprised to see me. Jordan, Victoria breathed, and I could hear years of history in that single word. What are you doing here? Natalie contacted me last month, he said, his voice growing stronger as he continued. She had some questions about Haven Hearts, about the charity work you told everyone you were doing, about the fundraising events you organized using my photography studio. The pieces were starting to fall into place with sickening clarity. Haven Hearts was Victoria's supposed nonprofit organization, something she'd launched 2 years ago with great fanfare about helping underprivileged children access arts education. She'd hosted several high-profile fundraising events, always making sure to be photographed for the society pages, always emphasizing her role as founder and executive director. Jordan helped me understand some things, Natalie continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom, like how Victoria used his studio and equipment for her fundraising events, but never actually paid the rental fees she promised, how she organized charity auctions featuring donated artwork, but somehow the proceeds never made it to any actual charitable causes. That's not true, Victoria protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Margaret Sinclair opened a leather portfolio she'd been carrying. According to our investigation, Haven Hearts has received over $200,000 in donations over the past 2 years. However, there's no record of any money being distributed to beneficiaries. In fact, there's no evidence that Haven Hearts has ever actually helped a single child. The gasps from the wedding guests were audible now. These weren't random strangers making accusations. These were official representatives of legitimate organizations, speaking with the authority of documented evidence. The fairy tale perfection of the evening was dissolving into something far more sinister. The most interesting part, David Chen added, consulting his own notes, is that Haven Hearts was never properly registered as a nonprofit organization with the state of Connecticut, which means all those tax-deductible donations people made were actually just gifts to Miss Thompson personally. Victoria's legs seemed to give out, and she sank into the nearest chair, her elaborate dress pooling around her like spilled cream. The tiara that had seemed so regal earlier now looked ridiculous, a costume piece on someone who'd been revealed as playing a part. But the real story, Natalie said, moving closer to Victoria with predatory grace, isn't just about the money, is it, Victoria? It's about the pattern, the way you've spent years manipulating people, taking advantage of their trust, their generosity, their love. She gestured to Jordan, who pulled out his phone with obvious reluctance. Jordan kept records of all his interactions with Victoria, contracts she signed but never honored, promises she made but never kept, photos from events where she claimed to be raising money for charity while actually just throwing herself expensive parties. The phone screen was large enough that several nearby guests could see the images Jordan was scrolling through. Photos of Victoria at elegant gatherings, always positioned prominently, always beautifully dressed, always the center of attention. But now, with context, they looked different, less like charitable work and more like elaborate self-promotion funded by other people's generosity. She convinced local businesses to donate services for these events, Jordan continued, his voice gaining strength. Catering, flowers, photography, venue space. Everyone thought they were supporting underprivileged children. Instead, they were subsidizing Victoria's social calendar. Ryan had moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine and squeezing tightly. I could feel the shock radiating from him, but also something else, protective anger at seeing his new wife's family drama explode so publicly. Natalie, I said quietly, how did you know about all this? Her smile was soft when she looked at me, genuinely affectionate for the first time all evening. Because I've been watching Victoria for years, Claire, watching how she operates, how she manipulates situations and people. When she insisted on being so involved in your wedding planning, when she started making all those helpful suggestions about vendors and locations, I got suspicious. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The vendors she recommended were all businesses that had donated services to her fake charity events. Natalie confirmed, she was trying to set up your wedding, the same way she set up her fundraisers. Get people to provide services for free or at reduced cost by implying it was somehow charitable or community-minded. Margaret Sinclair stepped forward again, her expression almost pitying as she looked at Victoria's crumpled form. We found correspondence between Ms. Thompson and several wedding vendors where she attempted to negotiate reduced rates by claiming the wedding was being featured in a charitable foundation's promotional materials. She was essentially trying to fraud your wedding expenses the same way she defrauded the charity donation. The ballroom had become completely silent except for the soft sound of Victoria's ragged breathing. 200 guests stood frozen, witnessing the systematic destruction of someone they'd known as a pillar of the community. A devoted sister, a successful young professional dedicated to helping others. There's more, David Chen said, consulting his tablet. We've been in contact with the IRS regarding the tax implications of Havenhart's activities. Filing false charitable organization paperwork is a federal crime, as is accepting donations under fraudulent pretenses. Victoria finally looked up, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears that had started falling without her seeming to notice. Claire, she whispered, please, you have to understand, I never meant for any of this to hurt you. The words were so perfectly crafted, so precisely calculated to evoke sympathy and redirect blame, that they had the opposite effect. Instead of feeling sorry for my sister, I felt a cold clarity settle over me like armor. You wore white to my wedding, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom. You spent months inserting yourself into every aspect of my wedding planning. You tried to manipulate my vendors into providing free services by using your fake charity, and now you're asking me to understand that you never meant to hurt me. Victoria's face crumpled further, but I continued, feeling words I'd never been able to say rising from some deep well of suppressed frustration. You've spent years making everything about you. Every family gathering, every celebration, every moment that should have belonged to someone else. And when that wasn't enough, you started stealing from people who trusted you, people who wanted to help children in need. The tears were flowing freely now, but they felt different from the calculated emotions Victoria usually deployed. These seemed raw, desperate. the tears of someone who'd finally been caught and was facing consequences she'd never imagined. The white dress wasn't about wanting to feel special, I continued, my voice growing stronger. It was about making sure that even on my wedding day, even in my wedding photos, everyone would be looking at you instead of me. It was about stealing the one day that was supposed to be mine. Jordan cleared his throat softly. There's something else, Claire. Something Natalie asked me to bring tonight. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a familiar-looking leather journal. My heart sank as I recognized it as the wedding planning notebook I'd been keeping for over a year, filled with vendor contacts, budget calculations, timeline details, and personal notes about every aspect of the celebration. Victoria borrowed this from you about 3 months ago, Jordan said. She told me she needed it to help coordinate some surprise element for your wedding. But she actually used it to contact your vendors directly, trying to renegotiate contracts and pricing without your knowledge. Margaret Sinclair nodded. We found emails where Thompson identified herself as your wedding coordinator and attempted to secure services by claiming the wedding was being sponsored by Helen. She was essentially trying to turn your wedding into another fundraising scam. The violation felt complete and devastating. Victoria hadn't just worn white to upstage me. She'd spent months systematically undermining my wedding, attempting to manipulate the very foundations of the celebration while positioning herself as the helpful, devoted sister. The room remained frozen in horrified fascination as the full scope of Victoria's deception became clear. This wasn't just about sibling rivalry or attention-seeking behavior. This was about a pattern of manipulation and fraud that had been building for years, with my wedding merely being the latest target of opportunity. Victoria struggled to her feet, her white dress wrinkled and stained with tears. The tiara had slipped sideways, making her look less like a princess and more like someone stumbling home from a costume party gone wrong. I need to go, she whispered, but her voice carried in the absolute silence of the ballroom. Actually, David Chen said apologetically, I'm afraid you can't leave just yet. We have some paperwork that needs to be served, and there are some questions that need to be answered. The fairy tale was officially over, and the real consequences were just beginning. The silence that followed David Chen's words stretched across the ballroom like a physical presence. 200 wedding guests stood frozen in their formal attire, champagne glasses forgotten in their hands, as they processed the transformation of what had been a joyous celebration into something resembling a courtroom drama. The fairy lights that had seemed so magical moments before now cast harsh shadows across Victoria's tear-streaked face, and the white dress that had been her weapon of choice now looked more like a surrender flag. Victoria swayed slightly on her feet, her hand clutching the back of a chair for support. The tiara had slipped further askew, and several strands of her carefully styled hair had escaped their pins. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the months of deception, the systematic manipulation of my wedding plans, the countless people she'd defrauded in the name of helping children, and any sympathy I might have felt crystallized into something hard. This is insane, Victoria said, her voice cracking as she looked around the ballroom at the sea of shocked faces. You're destroying my life over a misunderstanding. Heaven Hearts is legitimate. I have documentation, receipts, proof of everything. Margaret Sinclair's expression remained professionally neutral, but there was steel in her voice when she responded. Ms. Thompson, we've had forensic accountants examining your records for the past 6 weeks. The documentation you're referring to shows donations received, but there's no corresponding evidence of charitable disbursements. No contracts with schools, no receipts for art supplies purchased for underprivileged children, no payroll records for the teachers you claim to be supporting. What about the events? Victoria demanded, her desperation becoming more apparent with each word. The fundraising galas, the art auctions, the benefit concerts. Those happened, people attended, money was raised. Jordan stepped forward, his phone still in his hand, displaying the photos from Victoria's supposed charity events. The events happened, he agreed quietly, but they weren't charity fundraisers, Victoria. They were networking parties for your benefit. You used donated goods and services to throw yourself elaborate social gatherings, then kept whatever money came in. The crowd began to murmur now, voices rising as the full implications became clear. I could hear fragments of conversations as guests processed what they were witnessing. "I donated to that organization," someone whispered. "My company sponsored one of those events," another voice said. "We wrote a check for $5,000, a third person added, the hurt and betrayal evident in their tone. Natalie moved closer to Victoria with the measured pace of a predator who knew their prey had nowhere to run. "Tell them about the auction, Victoria, the one where you sold artwork that artists had donated specifically to help children, but kept the money for yourself." Victoria's face went completely white, except for two bright spots of color high on her cheekbones. "I used that money for operating expenses," she said, but her voice lacked any conviction. "Administrative costs are part of running a nonprofit." "Administrative costs that included a 2-week vacation in Europe?" David Chen asked, consulting his tablet. "Because we have credit card records showing charges in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona that coincide exactly with the dates. Money from that auction was deposited into your personal account." The gasps from the crowd were audible now. Several people began pulling out their phones, and I realized with a sinking feeling that this moment was being documented, probably already being shared on social media. My wedding reception was becoming a viral sensation for all the wrong reasons. Ryan moved closer to me, his arms sliding around my waist in a gesture of support that I desperately needed. "We can stop this," he whispered in my ear. "We can ask them to leave, deal with this privately later." But before I could respond, Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "You planned this," she said, staring at Natalie with undisguised hatred. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You brought these people here deliberately to humiliate me at my sister's wedding." Natalie's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I brought them here because you refused to take responsibility for your actions any other way. The Connecticut Attorney General's office has been trying to reach you for weeks, Victoria. You've ignored certified letters, dodged phone calls, and changed your address without notification. You left them no choice but to serve papers in person. And the timing?" Victoria demanded. "You chose tonight specifically to destroy me in front of everyone I know." "I chose tonight," Natalie replied calmly, "because you chose to wear white to your sister's wedding. Because you spent months trying to manipulate her vendors and turn her celebration into another one of your scams. Because even when faced with criminal charges, you couldn't resist making someone else's moment about you." The truth of those words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her hand flying to her throat as if she couldn't breathe. Around us, the wedding guests were beginning to choose sides, some moving away from Victoria in disgust while others seemed drawn by the drama like spectators at a car accident. My mother Helen finally found her voice, stepping forward with the commanding presence that had made her a formidable force in Millbrook Valley society for decades. "Victoria Elizabeth Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised 2 daughters and wouldn't tolerate nonsense from either of them. "Is what these people are saying true?" Victoria turned toward our mother with desperate hope, probably expecting the unconditional support Helen had always provided. But there was something different in Helen's expression, a coldness I'd never seen directed at either of her daughters. "Mom," Victoria whispered, "you have to believe me. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." "Answer the question," Helen said implacably. "Did you steal money that people donated to help children?" The word steal hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria couldn't dodge. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. Margaret Sinclair reached into her portfolio and withdrew a thick folder. "Mrs. Thompson, I have copies of every donation made to Haven Hearts over the past 2 years. Your daughter solicited funds from individuals, corporations, and foundations by claiming the money would directly benefit underprivileged children's access to arts education. The total amount received was $247,000. She paused, letting that figure sink in before continuing. "The total amount that can be documented as actually reaching any charitable purpose is $0.00." The number seemed to echo in the sudden silence. $250,000, stolen from people who thought they were helping children, used instead to fund Victoria's lifestyle and social aspirations. Ryan's father stepped forward from the crowd, his face gray. "Victoria, Our company donated $15,000 to Haven Hearts last year. We were told it would fund art programs in inner-city schools. And my foundation contributed $25,000, added Miss Westfield, a prominent philanthropist, whose family had been friends with ours for generations. We specifically designated that money for supplies and teacher salaries. One by one, other voices rose from the crowd. Wedding guests who had supported Victoria's supposed charity began identifying themselves and the amounts they'd contributed. The sum grew larger and more devastating with each revelation, and Victoria seemed to shrink physically as the scope of her deception became clear to everyone present. "Stop," Victoria finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, just stop." But Natalie wasn't finished. She reached into her small evening purse and withdrew what looked like a printed email. "There's one more thing everyone should know," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Victoria didn't just steal from strangers and acquaintances, she also tried to steal from Claire." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Natalie handed me the printed email, and I recognized immediately that it was correspondence between Victoria and one of my wedding vendors. The subject line read, "Contract Modification, Thompson Caldwell Wedding." As I read, the blood drained from my face. Victoria had contacted our florist 3 weeks before the wedding, identifying herself as my wedding coordinator and requesting that the bill be reduced by 50% in exchange for promotional consideration from Haven Hearts. She'd made similar contact with the caterer, the photographer, and even the string quartet, all attempting to negotiate reduced fees by claiming the wedding was somehow connected to her charity work. "She was going to present the savings to you as a wedding gift," Natalie explained, her voice gentle despite the devastating nature of her revelation. "But the money she saved would have been funneled through Haven Hearts and essentially become another theft from your vendors who thought they were supporting charity." The violation felt complete and personal in a way that all the other revelations had. Victoria hadn't just worn white to upstage me. She hadn't just stolen from well-meaning donors. She had actively attempted to corrupt my wedding, to turn my celebration into another vehicle for her fraud. "You used my wedding," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "You were going to make my vendors complicit in your theft, and you were going to present it to me as a gift." Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. The tears that had been threatening all evening began flowing freely, and her carefully constructed facade crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed. "It started so small, just a few expenses that I needed help with. But then people kept giving money, and I kept finding ways to justify using it. I told myself I'd pay it back when I could." "When you could?" David Chen asked, his voice carrying professional skepticism. "Miss Thompson, you've been operating this fraudulent organization for 2 years. You've purchased luxury goods, taken vacations, and maintained a lifestyle far beyond your legitimate income. When exactly were you planning to pay it back?" Victoria had no answer for that. She stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by 200 people who now knew the truth about her, wearing a white dress that had become a symbol of her selfishness and deception. The tiara that had seemed so important earlier had slipped completely off her head and lay forgotten on the floor beside her chair. Margaret Sinclair stepped forward with another document. "Miss Thompson, I'm serving you with a civil lawsuit on behalf of the Whitmore Foundation and 17 other organizations that donated to Haven Hearts. You're being sued for the full amount of fraudulent donations, plus damages and legal fees." David Chen produced his own paperwork. "And I'm serving you with a criminal complaint filed by the Connecticut Attorney General's office. You're being charged with charitable fraud, tax evasion, and wire fraud. The FBI will be handling the federal charges related to your use of interstate communications to solicit fraudulent donations." The words seemed to hit Victoria like physical blows. She swayed on her feet, and for a moment I thought she might collapse entirely. Around us, wedding guests were pulling out phones, some probably calling lawyers, others undoubtedly sharing the drama on social media. My fairy tale wedding had become a public relations nightmare, but as I watched my sister's complete breakdown, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a kind of exhausted relief. For years I'd felt like something was wrong in our family dynamic, like Victoria's constant need for attention and drama was creating an undercurrent of tension, that everyone pretended not to notice. Now, finally, the truth was out in the open. Victoria, I said, my voice cutting through her sobs, you need to leave. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Claire, please, I'm your sister. You can't just abandon me. You abandoned me first, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. You abandoned me when you decided to make my wedding about you. You abandoned me when you tried to turn my vendors into unwilling participants in your fraud. You abandoned me when you chose to steal from people who trusted you. Ryan stepped closer, his hand finding mine, and squeezing gently. The lawyers can handle the legal issues, he said quietly, but tonight is supposed to be about our marriage, about our future together, and you're not part of that future until you take responsibility for what you've done. Victoria's sobs grew louder, more desperate. She looked around the ballroom as if seeking support from someone, anyone, but found only faces filled with disgust, disappointment, or pity. Even our mother had turned away, unable to look at her younger daughter. This isn't over, Victoria said, her voice shifting from desperate pleading to something harder, more vindictive. You think you've won, but you don't know everything. There are things about this perfect little family that would shock you. Natalie stepped forward, her expression dangerous. Are you threatening Claire at her own wedding reception, Victoria? After everything that's been revealed tonight, you're actually going to try to make threats? Something in Natalie's tone made Victoria step backward, and I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. Whatever final card she thought she had to play, she apparently realized it wouldn't save her now. I want to go home, Victoria whispered, all the fight suddenly gone out of her. That's not possible, David Chen said apologetically. Given the seriousness of the charges and your demonstrated pattern of avoiding legal service, we'll need you to come with us tonight for processing. The words seemed to hit Victoria like a physical blow. Processing meant arrest, fingerprints, a mugshot, and a night in jail. The full weight of her situation was finally becoming real to her. As security personnel who had been waiting discreetly outside the ballroom entered to escort Victoria away, she looked back at me one last time. Her white dress was wrinkled and stained, her makeup ruined, her carefully styled hair a mess. She looked nothing like the confident, radiant woman who had swept into the bridal suite that morning determined to steal the spotlight. I hope you're happy, she said, but the words lacked any real venom. She just sounded tired and defeated. As they led her toward the exit, the ballroom remained in shocked silence. Then gradually, conversations began to resume. Guests clustered together, processing what they'd witnessed, sharing their own experiences with Victoria's charity, expressing support for Ryan and me. The fairy tale wedding had become something else entirely. But as I looked around at the faces of our friends and family, I realized that maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. The people who truly mattered were still here, still celebrating with us, still supporting our marriage despite the chaos Victoria had tried to create. The evening was far from over, but the worst was finally behind us. The ballroom felt different after Victoria's departure, as if a storm had passed and left the air cleaner but charged with electricity. The silence that had gripped 200 wedding guests gradually gave way to hushed conversations, and I could feel the weight of their collective gaze as they tried to process what they'd witnessed. Some faces showed shock, others displayed sympathy, and a few revealed the uncomfortable fascination that comes from watching someone's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Ryan's hand never left mine as we stood in the center of it all. Our wedding reception transformed into something unprecedented. The three-tiered cake still waited to be cut. The DJ's equipment hummed quietly in the background, and the dance floor remained empty as our guests struggled to return to celebration mode after witnessing what amounted to a public arrest. Natalie approached us with careful steps, her earlier predatory confidence replaced by something gentler. Claire, I'm so sorry this happened tonight. I never wanted your wedding to become a spectacle. I studied her face, seeing my best friend clearly for perhaps the first time all day. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? She nodded slowly. When Victoria insisted on being so involved in your wedding planning, when she started making all those helpful vendor suggestions, I got suspicious. I started asking questions, making phone calls. The more I learned, the more I realized someone had to stop her before she destroyed more lives. But why tonight? Ryan asked, his voice carefully controlled. Why not handle this privately, away from our wedding? Natalie's expression hardened slightly. Because Victoria made it about tonight, when she decided to wear white to Claire's wedding. Because she was planning to present fraudulent savings on your wedding expenses as a gift. Because even facing potential criminal charges, she couldn't resist making someone else's moment about her. The truth of those words settled over me like a blanket. Victoria had forced this confrontation by her own actions. Her own inability to let anyone else have a moment in the spotlight without trying to steal it for herself. Margaret Sinclair approached our small group. Her professional demeanor softened by what looked like genuine concern. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, I want to apologize for the disruption to your celebration. We had hoped to handle this matter more discreetly, but Thompson had made that impossible by avoiding all other attempts at contact. What happens now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The legal proceedings will take months. Possibly years, she replied honestly. The civil cases will focus on recovering the stolen funds and distributing them back to the legitimate donors. The criminal case will be handled by the state and federal prosecutors. Miss Thompson will likely face significant jail time if convicted. David Chen joined our conversation, his tablet tucked away and his official demeanor relaxed slightly. For what it's worth, cases like this often have a positive outcome for the victim. When someone's fraud is exposed this publicly, with this much documentation, recovery rates tend to be higher than average. Jordan Hayes lingered nearby, clearly uncertain whether he should leave or stay. I caught his eye and gestured for him to join us. Jordan, thank you for coming forward. I know this couldn't have been easy, he shrugged, but I could see the relief in his expression. Victoria cost my photography business a lot of money over the years. I kept thinking she'd eventually pay what she owed, but when Natalie contacted me and explained what was really happening, I realized she was never going to take responsibility on her own. How long have you known? I asked. Suspected for about a year, he admitted, but I didn't have proof until I started keeping detailed records of every interaction. When you're dealing with someone who manipulates the truth as easily as breathing, documentation becomes essential. The harsh reality of that statement hit me with unexpected force. My sister wasn't just someone who made poor choices or got in over her head. She was someone who manipulated truth as a matter of course, who built relationships on foundations of deception, who used other people's trust and love as tools for her own advancement. My mother Helen finally approached our group, her face pale but determined. Claire, Ryan, I owe you both an apology. I've known for years that Victoria had problems with money, with taking credit for things she didn't do, with bending the truth when it suited her. I kept hoping she'd grow out of it, that she'd learn to be better. I enabled her behavior by making excuses and covering for her. The admission must have cost her enormously. Helen Thompson had built her reputation in Millbrook Valley society on the success and respectability of her family. Having one daughter exposed as a criminal at the other daughter's wedding reception was a nightmare scenario for someone who valued appearances as much as she did. Mom, I said gently, you couldn't have prevented this. Victoria made her own choices, but I could have stopped making excuses for her, Helen replied firmly. I could have insisted she face consequences for her actions years ago, before it escalated to this level. I'm going to do better going forward. Ryan squeezed my hand and stepped slightly forward, addressing the small group that had gathered around us. I think we need to make a decision about the rest of the evening. Our guests don't know whether to keep celebrating or start heading home. Looking around the ballroom, I could see he was right. People were clustered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves, but the energy of celebration had been completely disrupted. Some guests had already begun leaving, probably deciding that the evening had become too uncomfortable to continue. Others seemed to be waiting for some signal from us about how to proceed. What do you want to do? Natalie asked me. It's your wedding day. However you want to handle this, we'll support you. I took a deep breath, considering our options. We could end the reception early, retreat to process what had happened in private. We could try to pretend nothing had occurred and attempt to resume the celebration, or we could acknowledge what had happened and choose to move forward anyway. I want to dance with my husband, I said finally. I want to cut our cake and listen to toasts from people who actually love us. I want to celebrate the fact that we're married, despite everything Victoria tried to do to sabotage it. Ryan's smile was brilliant. Are you sure? It's going to be weird, dancing and celebrating after everything that just happened. It's going to be weird anyway, I replied. But this is our wedding day, and we get to decide how it ends. Victoria tried to make it about her, but it's not. It's about us, about our marriage, about the people who chose to stay and celebrate with us. Natalie beamed at me with pride. That's the Claire I know and love, the one who doesn't let other people's drama define her happiness. I walked to the center of the dance floor and gestured for the DJ to turn up his microphone. The conversations around the ballroom gradually quieted as guests realized I was about to address the room. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. I know tonight has been unusual, to put it mildly. Many of you are probably wondering what happens next, whether you should stay or go, how to process what you've witnessed. I paused, looking around at the faces of our friends and family. These were people who had traveled from various distances to celebrate with us, who had bought gifts and taken time from their own lives to witness our marriage. They deserved acknowledgement of what had occurred, but they also deserved the celebration they'd come for. The truth is, what happened tonight with my sister is disappointing and painful, but it's also not really about Ryan and me. It's about choices Victoria made that had nothing to do with our relationship or our marriage, and I refuse to let her poor choices define what should be one of the happiest days of our lives. A few people in the crowd nodded, and I could see some of the tension beginning to ease from their faces. So, here's what I propose, I continued. Anyone who wants to leave, please feel free to do so with our understanding and gratitude for being here. But anyone who wants to stay, let's celebrate, let's dance, and eat cake and toast to love and commitment, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly support you. Ryan joined me in the center of the dance floor, his arms sliding around my waist. What my wife said, he added with a grin, and the sound of him calling me his wife sent a thrill through me that Victoria's drama couldn't diminish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The guests who remained began applauding, and I could see smiles returning to faces that had been shocked and somber moments before. The DJ, taking his cue, began playing our second dance song and couples started moving onto the floor. As Ryan and I swayed together to the music, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the disruption we'd just experienced. This moment, dancing with my husband while surrounded by people who genuinely cared about us, felt more authentic than any of the carefully choreographed perfection Victoria had tried to sabotage. No regrets? Ryan asked softly as he spun me gently. None, I replied, and meant it completely. Victoria showed everyone who she really is tonight. That's not my responsibility or my shame to carry. Over the next 2 hours, our reception transformed into something more intimate and genuine than I'd originally planned. The guests who stayed were the ones who truly mattered to us, and without the undercurrent of Victoria's manipulation and attention-seeking, the celebration felt more relaxed and joyful. The cake cutting proceeded with laughter and playful frosting smudges. The toasts were heartfelt and personal, focusing on our relationship and the support of the people around us. The dancing was energetic and fun, with even my traditionally reserved father joining in for the group song. Margaret Sinclair and David Chen had left shortly after Victoria's departure, but not before providing their contact information and assuring us that our cooperation might be needed, but that we were not under any investigation ourselves. Jordan stayed for another hour, reconnecting with college friends and seeming genuinely happy to be part of a celebration rather than an interrogation. As the evening wound down and the last guests began departing with hugs and congratulations, Natalie helped me gather my belongings from the bridal suite. The white dress Victoria had worn was nowhere to be seen, probably taken as evidence or simply abandoned in the chaos of her departure. "Are you angry with me?" Natalie asked as she carefully folded my reception shoes into their box. For bringing everything out into the open tonight, I considered the question carefully. I'm grateful, I said finally. Victoria was never going to take responsibility on her own. She was going to keep manipulating people, keep stealing from them, keep making every situation about her until someone forced her to stop. I'm glad it was you who forced it, and I'm glad it happened before she could hurt more people. Even though it ruined your wedding reception, it didn't ruin anything, I replied firmly. It revealed the truth, and sometimes the truth is messy and uncomfortable, but it's still better than living in a beautiful lie. 6 months later, I sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse where Victoria's sentencing hearing had just concluded. She'd pled guilty to multiple charges of fraud and tax evasion in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years in federal prison and full restitution to her victims. The judge had been particularly harsh in his comments about betraying the trust of people who thought they were helping children. Helen had attended every court hearing, supporting Victoria despite everything, while also making sure she understood that there would be no more excuses, no more bailouts, no more enabling. It was a difficult balance, but I was proud of my mother for finding it. Ryan and I had used the settlement money recovered from Victoria's fraud to establish a legitimate scholarship fund for underprivileged children interested in arts education. We named it the Heaven Hearts Memorial Fund, reclaiming the name Victoria had corrupted and using it for its intended purpose. Natalie joined me at the coffee shop after the sentencing, sliding into the booth across from me with her own latte. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Relieved," I answered honestly. "It's finally over. Victoria can serve her time, hopefully get the help she needs, and maybe eventually we can have some kind of relationship again, but it won't be based on me pretending her behavior is acceptable. And your marriage? How are you and Ryan adjusting to all the notoriety?" I smiled, thinking about the life we'd built together in the months since our dramatic wedding reception. "We're stronger than ever. Dealing with all this together, learning to set boundaries with toxic family members, building something authentic instead of performative. It's actually brought us closer together." The scandal had made headlines for weeks, particularly in Millbrook Valley's social circle. Some people had been sympathetic, others had seemed to revel in the drama, but Ryan and I had learned to focus on the opinions that actually mattered to us. We'd discovered that having our relationship tested early by external stress had taught us valuable lessons about communication and mutual support. "Victoria asked to see me before they transport her to federal prison," I said, stirring my coffee thoughtfully. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for that conversation. What would you want to say to her?" Natalie asked. I thought about it for a long moment. That I hope she uses this time to figure out who she actually is when she's not performing for an audience. That I still love her but I won't enable her anymore. That when she gets out, if she's ready to have a real relationship based on honesty, I'll be here. And if she's not ready for that, then I'll be sad, but I'll be okay. I've learned that you can't love someone into being better. They have to choose that for themselves. As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on how much had changed since that morning, when Victoria had walked into my bridal suite wearing white. I'd started that day as someone who avoided confrontation, who made excuses for others' bad behavior, who prioritized keeping peace over addressing problems. I'd ended that day as someone who was willing to set boundaries, who understood the difference between being supportive and being enabling, who had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's destructive behavior. The wedding reception that had seemed ruined by scandal had actually been the beginning of a more authentic life. A life where I didn't have to pretend that Victoria's selfishness was sisterly love, where I could celebrate my own achievements without worrying about overshadowing her, where I could build relationships based on genuine affection, rather than obligation. Ryan and I still laughed about our wedding day, though it had taken months before we could see the humor in it. We'd gotten married, exposed a criminal enterprise, and learned valuable lessons about family dynamics all in one evening. As wedding receptions go, it had certainly been memorable. The white dress Victoria had chosen as her weapon had ultimately become the symbol of her downfall. In trying to steal the spotlight, she'd actually illuminated her own deception, so brightly that it could no longer be ignored or explained away. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planned at all. Sometimes it's simply refusing to participate in someone else's drama and choosing to live authentically despite their attempts to sabotage your happiness. Victoria had worn white to my wedding, but I'd walked away from that day clothed in something far more valuable, the knowledge of who I really was, and what I was willing to accept from the people in my life. The truth had set us all free, even if Victoria wasn't ready to appreciate that freedom yet. And as I finished my coffee and prepared to go home to my husband and our honest and perfect, authentic life together, I felt nothing but gratitude for the dramatic evening that had started it all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.